TJ, hello, how are you?
Good morning. Yeah, very well. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, seriously, thank you so very much. I really appreciate you taking time out of your morning. And I know you're going to jump a plane to Switzerland later today. Lifestyles of the rich and famous, huh?
I wish.
Yeah. So, beautiful people, I want to introduce you to someone that I met this time last year, I think, via some author interviews that I do. And I had the great pleasure to meet or to receive this book called Many Worlds to Conquer. And it resonated with me on so many levels. And then when I got to connect with TJ, it just, click, 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 really cool. And I think that you'll all get a great deal out of this particular message. So TJ Halbertsma, thank you so much for being with me today. It's very cool that you'd be available.
Excellent. Great to be here.
Because you're in London too, just by the way. I should have mentioned that. So
I'm based in London. Yeah, I lived here for 25 years. I'm Dutch, but I've lived quite a few different places, but London really is home.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? So you do call it home now, even though, like you say, originally from Dutch land, which is the Netherlands, right? Educate me for a moment.
Correct. Yeah, but the nice thing about London is that it's a very international, it's a very cosmopolitan city, and you meet people from all over the world, and that really makes this, such a draw. That gives energy.
Yeah, cool. So, as I said before, I met you because you wrote this brilliant book called Many Worlds to Conquer, and well, firstly, before we get into the content of the book, can you share with my listeners what Many Worlds to Conquer means to you, the metaphor of that title?
Yeah, so it is really about a personal journey, and it's not just about doing adventures. Anyone can do an adventure, but what is important is that you're trying to give some meaning to your adventures. And what I've tried to do is find meaning in the sense that I'm raising money for charity, and I use my adventures to do that. And that's how I address, some particular, needs that I have. So, for example, I don't have kids, but my nephew is called Felix. He is a type 1 diabetic. And for me, it gives an incredible sense of purpose that I'm able to help him by raising money for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation through my adventures. And in the beginning of my book, I asked the question, why would anyone ever climb a mountain? But at the end, I have an answer to that question. I can give meaning to my adventures, and that is actually a metaphor for what everyone should try to do with their life as well. Make a difference. Try to give meaning to something. So on many different worlds, and I should say on many different levels, I think I'm adding value. I'm making a difference, and that's why the book is called Many Worlds to Conquer, because it's not just those physical mountains that you're trying to conquer. It's also personal mountains that you're trying to climb.
Yeah. And that's such a great metaphor for life, really, because so many of those mountains that you climb aren't actually the ones under your feet, right? The ones that are in the Alps and so on.
Well, no, absolutely. And it is, the message of the book is very clearly like, get out of your comfort zone and you'll be amazed about what you can achieve, because every single adventure describes that. I started out not knowing how to climb a mountain. I'm from probably the flattest country in the world, the Netherlands. But nevertheless, I've climbed the biggest mountains in the Alps. Same thing with my swimming. I didn't know how to swim 100 meters and I escaped from Alcatraz. Same thing with my paddleboarding across the English Channel. So it really goes to show that I have no special abilities. I'm a very ordinary guy, but I've done things that other people have described as extraordinary. So an ordinary guy doing extraordinary things. And I'm so ordinary that if I can do that, you can definitely do that. In fact, you can do anything you want as long as you commit yourself. And that really is the message. Get out of your comfort zone and you'll be amazed what you can achieve.
Yeah.
And clearly, I'm not telling people that they should also climb mountains. But if you want to learn Spanish, if you want to learn how to dance the tango, it's those sort of things that you can do as well. You should just try to get rid of those excuses and just go for it. That really is the message.
Totally. And the other thing, so actually, no, before I do move on, because some of the other things, so, you know, you've jumped out of a perfectly good plane, for example, as have I. And we've done it for the same charity. What's more?
There you go.
Honestly, there were so many little links that we have. It's kind of hilarious. I love the wonderful way of the world and all these little idiosyncrasies that link us to different people. But so yeah, apart from all of those wonderful adventures, I remember one of the things, was it in Scotland where you climbed something in Scotland and you took a group of kids? Was that right?
Yeah, that was an adventure that I called Ain't No Mountain High Enough. And that was, so I had 10 kids who are all type 1 diabetic. And you could feel that quite often their parents try to hold them back a bit. Be careful because you have a specific condition that does not allow you to do this or that. But if someone else from the outside actually encourages them to get out of their comfort zone, maybe their parents will accept that and allow them to go on an adventure, something that they wouldn't initiate themselves. So together with the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, I organized this trek up Ben Nevis, which is the highest mountain in Scotland. And you could feel that the kids were anxious, but also excited at the same time. And some of them had looked at that mountain all their lives, but never thought they'd be able to scale it. Yeah. And then when we did it, and this was all under very close medical supervision, we had a guide, we weren't taking any risks, but everyone made it, and everyone on that summit had such a smile on their face. And I thought, this is what I do this for. I mean, mountaineering can have a purpose after all. I mean, if you're making a difference for these kids, I mean, nothing gives me greater fulfillment. And again, I don't have kids of my own, so to be able to do that for 10 children, I mean, it was very, very fulfilling. And that was, yeah, it's an adventure. It's the last adventure in the book, but it really sums up what this book is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I remember rightly, there was one lad in particular that really touched you, or, you know, that really inspired that sense of difference.
He was quite rough in many different ways, and he didn't want to have any help, and he didn't want to acknowledge the fact that he had diabetes, and he probably got in trouble already because he had an ulcer on his foot, and he simply he'd ignored it for too long. But this trip was a game changer for him, that he said, you know, I have an issue that I need to deal with. He was struggling to get back, you know, he was struggling to get to the summit. But when he made it, you know, he said to himself, listen, I know that I can do things that other people can do as well, but I got to take care of myself. I realize that now. And he started crying, and I cried with him. I never thought this guy would ever cry, but he did. And that was a very beautiful moment.
That's so cool. And see, so right now, as people listen to this, they could be forgiven for thinking that this is what you do, that you are an adventurer, you're a mountaineerer, and, you know, in your spare time, you happen to write a book and whatever else. Yeah. And they think, here we are, you're this wonderful, benevolent man who raises money for, you know, an awesome cause. But the truth is, that's really quite a small part of who you are. Right?
Yeah, I do that on the side because
that's your side hustle.
Job, but my day job, I have a day job. I run a big investment organization, and that takes up a lot of time. Now there are a lot of similarities between my adventures and running a business. It's all about setting a goal. It's all about getting out of your comfort zone. It's all about being disciplined, putting a strategy in place, getting the right team together. So a lot of similarities between the two. But I have a real day job. And that's also why I say that I'm an ordinary guy, because I take the tube, which is probably what you guys call the metro, like public transport, to the office every day. I wear a suit. I sit in front of a computer every day, right? But that is, for me, not an excuse to also have something outside of life. And it gives me, you know, that balance that I have in my life, I think is due to the fact that I have these two things that really give me energy. If I didn't do my adventures, I would be pretty miserable. But if I only climbed mountains and I didn't do anything, you know, real during the day, I'd probably have the same thing. So it's a perfect combination that works very well for me.
Yeah, perfect. And so Can you tell it a little bit about your business? Like, you know, like you say, it's a large organization, you have staff, and the kind of, you know, the work that you do.
Yeah, so my business is asset management. So we invest money on behalf of third parties. We do that for all sorts of clients, institutional clients like the super funds, but we also do that for retail clients like moms and pops. We do that through intermediaries. So I don't invest money myself. I run the business and I'm responsible for the commercial aspect of our firm. But it is a big global organization. Our head offices are in the United States, but I travel around the world. So I spend a lot of time in Australia. I spend time in Tokyo. I spend time in Singapore, but also all over Europe and the Middle East. So I travel a lot. And that's also one of the things that I think is incredibly rewarding and enriching. Traveling, getting access to different cultures, seeing things differently because you hear arguments that normally you wouldn't hear in your own country. I think that's very healthy. People need to have a global perspective to, you know, to grow, in my view.
Totally agree. In fact, 150% agree with that. We all need to travel more to experience those different cultures. That's, like you say, that's where we do grow, get a greater appreciation for more unites us than divides us, right?
Absolutely. And once you start traveling, you start to approach certain issues in a different way. So if there is a particular, you know, let's say a political event, you don't say this is right or this is wrong, but you try to put it in a different context and you say it's different, right?
Yeah.
It's something that, you know, I've learned over the years. Don't think in terms of right or wrong or good or bad. Sometimes you don't have to judge. They're different, and accept that.
Yeah, perfect. Great philosophy. What would be an example of that for you?
Well, you guys probably know that Brexit was a hot topic here in...
You did hear a little bit about that, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm Dutch, so I read a lot of Dutch newspapers, and I hear a lot of continental European arguments against Brexit. But having lived in the UK for 25 years, I understand what causes them to suggest Brexit. So for me, I was an outsider in the sense that I'm not allowed to vote because I don't have a British passport. So I was a bystander. But it was interesting to see the arguments from both sides. I think both of them had some pretty good points. And we are where we are. The country is now out of the EU, so Brexit has taken place. We're now moving on. But it was an interesting 4 years with lots of pros and cons.
Yeah. So the sun still comes up in the UK, even though you've exited
well,
the
not
EU?
Today. It's raining and it's and it's pretty grey. But yes, life continues. Life goes on, even with the coronavirus. Yeah.
I know. Yes. Let's not dwell. Okay. So I'm curious then, in relation to that business life then. But I have a sneaking suspicion I know what your answer might be, because it plays out in your adventuring piece as well. And it's your definition of leadership. When you think about leadership personally or professionally, how do you define that? And then how do you live that?
I mean, leadership is really about having a vision. And having a vision then also means that you have to define a strategy to achieve those objectives. But you then have to take ownership of the implementation. And that doesn't mean that you have to do everything yourself. To the contrary. But too often that last step is neglected. And if you take a look at, for example, Steve Jobs, right? So he was the late founder of Apple. His vision was to make a contribution to the world by making tools for the mind that advance humankind. I mean, that is very vague, and it doesn't mean anything unless you act upon it. But because he did, we now have iPhones and iPads, and he had a strategy, but he also drove that process himself by leading a strong team, and then he changed the world. right? Some argue that he was too involved. He was a very difficult man. He didn't want to delegate anything. I know that often that has been it's been a big point of criticism, but at the same time, without him, I don't think that Apple would be what it is today. But in mountaineering, I mean, that is pretty similar. So a gentleman who probably, you've heard of many of times, Edmund Hillary, the first person in the world who climbed Mount Everest. It was pretty simple because just before the war broke out, he said to a friend, like, I'm going to climb the highest mountain in the world. And that is something that at the time, because it had never been climbed before, is quite a statement. But he had this vision. He wanted to do it. But he then actually thought about, how could I do this? And he came up with a strategy. He had a very strong support team. And in particular, the Sherpa, of course, Tenzing Norgay was instrumental in getting him to the top. But he had also a much larger group that supported him. But he did scale that highest mountain in 1953, Mount Everest. And again, it's about someone having a vision. But if you simply have a vision, maybe to find a strategy and then leave it at that, it's not going to happen. He actually then had to climb that mountain himself. So I really think that leadership is also about doing. It is about doing the right thing, showing everyone what the direction is that you think the firm or the group should take, and then you'll get people to follow you.
Yeah.
So that's in short what I think leadership is about.
Cool. Very cool. I think it's really interesting that, you made the point there, whether it's Steve Jobs or Edmund Hillary, there is that piece around, they didn't do it on their own. And I think it's really interesting. We celebrate Steve Jobs, we celebrate Sir Edmund Hillary, and it's like but sure, they're the ones that get the accolades, but there's a team of people, like you say, the Sherpa or Wozniak, and then the myriad of crew that were on that journey with them, be that journey being up the mountain or whatever. I was going to say Silicon Valley, but I don't even know that. You know what I mean, right? The whole Apple journey, right?
Yeah.
They're not doing it on their own, but by the same token, they're prepared to share the path. Like they're walking their leadership talk. They're saying, "This is where we're going. I'm going with you." And it's funny, as you were saying that, I don't know why I thought about this as an example, but it's the Christopher Columbus conversation as well. He had the courage and the vision and the audacity to go, I'm going to prove the world isn't flat. So, but he didn't do it on his own. He had to champion a crew of people that were going to be brave and bold to go with him on that exploration, just as Edmund Hillary did and Steve Jobs. So, yeah.
Well, and it's very important that you assemble the right team, because that quite often is crucial to your success. And you have to ask yourself the question, so why is this person going to be value added to the team? I mean, what is the person's intrinsic motivation to either work at the company or to join me on this specific expedition? If you're just doing it because you need the money, I just need the paycheck, they're not going to give it a full 100%. You want someone who buys into your vision. You want someone who has the same sense of purpose that you have, and that's when you're going to go all the way together. So you got to spend a lot of time on your actual selection of team members, whether it is in the mountains or whether it's in business. And and I think this is actually where you have quite a lot of experience as well. How do you assemble the best teams? How do you encourage dynamic teamwork? I mean, there's a lot of science behind that, but the point that I make is, like, it's more important than a lot of people think. Just having bodies in the team is not good enough.
Exactly. Absolutely. Well said. Champion effort.
There you go.
So, boom. Okay. So then, in relation to that, what would you say has been your best investment? And I want to preface that maybe on a couple of levels, because sure, we could talk about your best investment financially, but I wonder if it might be a little more emotional. and even spiritual, if you will? Like, what's been your...
Well, I think, probably the best investment that I made, and at the time it wasn't that obvious, but my father said when I finished my university degree, he said, now you got to take a year off, you got to learn your languages. And he said, if there's one competitive advantage that the Dutch have, is that they speak languages easily. So you can pick up a language like that, especially because if you're in Europe, you got France, you got Germany, you got all these other countries on your doorstep, it's easy to go abroad. So what my father said is, why don't you spend half a year in Paris and half a year in Munich in Germany to improve your French and your German? And that's what I did. So I speak 4 languages now. And that probably is the best decision I ever made, although I have to give credit to my father. It wasn't really my decision. But it really opened me up as a person, and it goes back to what I just said. If you travel the world, if you meet people from different cultures and different countries, you are going to grow as a person. That is incredibly important. And I think that year that I took off to live in Paris and Munich, that really changed me. After that, I went to London, and it's, same thing as I said about London, very international, very multicultural. That helps you grow as a person. So probably that was the best thing I ever did.
Fantastic. And again, how do you think that has paid off for you? How is that investment? Because, for example, how did you get into doing what you do professionally?
Yeah, so the reason why I run my business, and I'm responsible in particular for everything that we do outside of the United States. So I spend a lot of time around the world. And the reason that I got that is that I have a pretty global view on the world. It's not so much that I speak a couple of languages, but I really don't think in boxes or in terms of countries. My wife is from Hawaii, so I spend a lot of time there. But at the same time, I have a lot of friends who live in London who are Asian. I have friends from all over. It really has given me a global mindset that helped me to get the job as head of global here at my firm. So I think that has been good. And you just, too often people have that preset idea of what your life should be about, what you want to achieve by a certain age, what car you want to drive, which title you need to have. My advice is let go of any of that. Just be open-minded, see what comes your way, and go for it the moment you see an opportunity arise. So that's also one of the things in business that's very important. Sometimes an opportunity gets presented to you on a silver platter, and people are just completely ignoring it. And I say, this is so obvious, why don't you go for it? And I think if you want to get ahead in life, don't be afraid to take a risk. If you see something that looks good, do it.
Perfect. How do you know for yourself, because that is such good advice, right? How do you know what is worth the risk for yourself?
Well, I do think that you have to take calculated risks. So you always have to take, and this is also what we in finance, what we do every day. We take a look, what is the downside, what is the upside, and if there's more upside than downside, then it's a good decision. If there is an asymmetrical risk pattern in the sense that there's too much downside versus the upside, you don't go for it. But sometimes you cannot clearly, put a number on a specific risk factor that comes your way. Sometimes you have to trust your gut. And quite often you know whether something is right or something is wrong. I remember very well that I was skiing. This was the last day. We were with a group and everybody was pretty good skiers. And we came to a ski ramp and we said, let's go ski jumping. And I'd never done this before. Right. And I was standing on top of the ski ramp and the first guy went down, and he was an incredible skier. He was also a ski teacher. And he flew through the air. He landed perfectly. And he said, TJ, now it's your turn. And my stomach told me, TJ, this is a dumb thing. Really, you should not do this. And nevertheless, because of peer pressure, I did it anyway. And guess what? I fell. I broke my collarbone. And I asked myself the next day, how could you be so stupid? You knew you didn't have to do this. So for me, that was a true reminder that you got to listen to your gut feel. And I shouldn't have done that. So quite often I do have my intuition lead me. Doesn't mean that I don't look at the fact. In fact, that's what I start with. But don't ignore what your mind or what your gut is telling you. It's incredibly important.
Yeah, totally. I just had visions of Eddie the Eagle then for some reason, you know, when he was talking.
Well, he's much better than I am. So can you imagine what I look like?
Oh goodness me! That was I mean, that was such a great story, the Eddie Eagle story. But also that's a great example. Your experience there on the ski jump, and
But also Eddie the Eagle, I wouldn't say that he is one of, you know, that he'd be an inspiration for me. But the same thing, he had an idea. He says, I want to be an Olympic ski jumper. And he was pretty lousy. But nevertheless, he became an Olympic ski jumper. And you can do it.
Yeah. That's right. It was honestly great story. Really great story.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting. So when you talk about trusting your gut, I know one of the things that you know, my people hear me talk about all the time is this thing around you know, fear versus faith, and fear being that false evidence appearing real thing. And I always talk about fear is always going to be loudest when faith, and by faith I mean that kind of, you know, that is your gut, that's, you know, finding the answers in the heart, that passionate pursuit, that ping that's just not going away, the piece that lights you up and delivers that excitement and so on. And we always talk about the fact that when fear is at its loudest, it's often when faith has the most to gain. So, you know, you got to recognize on the ski jump there for you, maybe it was that whole thing going, all right, so what do you need to look at here that might not be the best thing to do for you? Right?
Yeah.
So in that moment, it was probably trying to caution you and say, dude, step away from the jump.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that is the same in life, but also in finance. So that's what I do. I mean, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. So if the market sells off for whatever reason and everyone is selling, that's when you should be buying. And time and again, that has proven to be the right strategy. Yeah. The same thing in life. You know that a lot of people worry too much because they worry quite often about things that will never happen. And too many people, especially when they're on their deathbed, they say, I should have done this, I should have done that. But then you can ask yourself, if you know that, why wouldn't I do this now? I mean, so many people say, I wish I'd taken more risks. Well, if you know that, just make sure that when you're on your deathbed, that you're not going to be one of them. Just go for it. Take risks. Don't do stupid things. That's not what I'm saying. Take calculated risk. But don't be afraid to push out of your comfort zone and get things done.
Absolutely. Fantastic.
That's an interesting, for example, that's an interesting discussion always about, oh, I pushed out of my comfort zone and I failed. But so many people have said this, that failure actually is a good thing. You don't learn more from success than you learn from mistakes. And why is that? And there is this theory about cognitive learning that tells you that if you are trying to you have set your objectives, you're trying to be successful. If you fail and then try again and ultimately you'll succeed, your brain starts to recognize failure in a different way. Your brain doesn't recognize failure as such. It just becomes a necessary step to ultimately reach that goal. So you have a different mindset when you don't get from A to B to C in one go. It's just a longer process. And it's important that you keep going. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because ultimately you will go a lot farther than you would have if you weren't able to get out of your comfort zone or weren't willing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that point, if I can just further affirm that, I so often liken that piece around the perceived failure is like going to the gym, right? It's like you don't go to the gym once, right, and then walk away and go, man, I'm buff, right? It's like you go repeatedly, and each time, what people don't understand, or a lot of people don't understand, is our muscles gain strength because our muscles break down and rebuild and break down and rebuild, and that's part of the muscular growth process, right? And the same is true for us. Like you say, we strengthen our mindset because we have these moments when, damn, that didn't work. I have to think harder. I've got to, retract, retrace, and that's where we get our growth mindset. And
it's exact. It's a growth mindset. Is that the resilience that's incredibly important.
Yeah.
And to go back to the Apple example, I mean, a lot of people forget that Steve Jobs was actually fired from his own company. He founded it at the age of, I think he was 30, it was 1985. He was ousted by the then president, which was John Sculley. Now, ultimately, he came back, I think it was in 97, and he made Apple into what it is today, but he called that that ousting from Apple in 1985, he called that the most devastating event of his life, and he said, I was such an obvious public failure. But it spurred him on to do what he ultimately did. So as long as you can use those, between brackets, failures in the right way, it will get you to go far.
Yeah.
Same as with mountaineering. I mean, there are many mountains that I haven't reached. For one of the examples in the book that I gave is I was climbing Denali, which is the highest mountain in North America. 3 weeks on the mountain, we had to retreat because of bad weather. Ultimately, that meant I didn't summit, so that was a failure. I came back to the office, and everyone said, well, 3 weeks away, you must have done something very special. Well, I didn't make it to the summit. And that felt bad. That felt really bad. But I was in such good shape because of those 3 weeks on the mountain that I thought, if I ever want to climb the Eiger, which is one of the most challenging mountains in Europe, this is the type of fitness that is required. So I used that to actually climb the Eiger a couple of weeks later, and that probably is the pinnacle of my climbing career. But it was because of that failure on Denali that I was able and motivated to do this. So don't be afraid to fall flat on your face. It's going to happen. Just use it as an experience to gain from it and to get better next time.
Brilliant. Great message. Great message. TJ, I could talk to you for hours, as you know. But I know you've got to go and get a plane and go to another mountain and eat and do some more skiing and all that kind of stuff. Are you going to do the ski jump this time while you're there?
I think I'll skip it this time.
Oh, come on. All right. All right. So let's look in closing, and you may have already said this in lots of different ways, but I mean, if there was one thing that you could say to somebody now who, I know they're hungry for something, they just don't know what they hunger for. I know you said about when opportunity presents, but yeah, like I say, they're hungry for something, but they don't know what they're hungry for. What would you say to them?
It's interesting because we have a lot of people in the office who, as I said, they're looking for more than just a paycheck. It's about having a purpose. It is about doing something right for, society at large, which means clients, its employees, its other stakeholders, like, the community. So you got to think of that purpose. But what I find is a lot of people come in and say, okay, I'm here, tell me what my purpose is. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? Purpose is something that you develop. It's something that is the result of who you are, but also of your experiences, of the people that you meet, things that happen to you. And for me, I think I found my purpose, which I describe in the book as well, with Felix, JDRF, doing what I'm passionate about, but doing that for the greater good. And it's something that has been a 25-year journey, but it has come to me and it's all of a sudden clicked. And that's also the moment that I decided to write a book. But it's something that only develops if you're open-minded and if you go for it, reach out and see what your place is in the world. So don't expect someone to tell you what it is. Go out and find it. And you're only going to find what your purpose is, what your role in life is, if you are doing what you're supposed to be doing, which is traveling the world, which is listening to other people, and it will come. But don't be too impatient. There are a lot of people who nowadays I feel want to change the world by the age of 22. Well, not everyone's going to do that. Just go with the flow. So the other thing I just think is important for people is surround yourself with positive people. I feel that, especially with a lot of our younger people, it's mental health is a pretty big issue, and maybe social media has something to do with this, but I find that it's for me, that gives me a lot of energy if I have people around me who are also goal-getters, who are trying to get from A to B. And if you have these people, you spur each other on. It's good. So surround yourself with a good crew that is like-minded, who also have a positive outlook on life. It will make you a better person.
Yeah. And I've got one last question that might seem a little random. I want to go back to your book, right? Because right at the beginning of the book, you share something that you did when you were, I think, 5. Do you remember?
Yeah, that was, to be honest, it was only when my mother reminded me that I remembered what I'd done. But I presume you're referring to the store and the bike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you share, just for if you would have?
Sure. So yeah, I was 5 years old. I knew how to ride a bike, and we were at home. It was lunchtime, but we had to go back to school. And my mother would normally take my twin brother and myself in the car to school. But when she ran upstairs to get something, she came down and I was gone. And she couldn't find me in the house. And she asked my brother, where did TJ go? I said, I don't know. He just walked out. And it turned out that I actually had jumped on my bike and started the journey to school. But I didn't know anything about roads, how it worked with cars, one-way traffic, etc. So I just went for it.
Yeah.
And I probably had a few near-death experiences, but nevertheless, I made it to school, and it was about 5K, and I was incredibly proud. And I thought, I'm going to get a hero's welcome. Well, obviously I didn't. I was told off by the school teacher and by my mother as well. But it was an indication that I was looking to explore the world at an early age. And I got a sense of achievement. Now, obviously, it was a dumb thing to do. I learned that was a risk that was not properly rewarded. But it did, in my view, kickstart my my exploring career. But because it just gave me a sense of I want to see what's out there.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where my question is. Do you believe it's nature or nurture? Are you born with the spirit of adventure and the desire to discover your purpose, live your purpose, and lead, or is it something that is developed over the course of time?
Yeah, the Dutch have always been explorers. That Abel Tasman, who you probably know because he was the one who discovered Tasmania, New Zealand. But we had a lot of other, for example, polar explorers like Willem Barents. So I guess there is something in our DNA that makes us want to explore the world. But I think a lot of that is also is very much nurture. You can grow as a person. I've seen people who I knew well who all of a sudden got a leadership role, and it really made them grow as a person. So if you get that opportunity, just go for it. Right? A lot of people have also declined opportunities because they say, I'm not ready for it. Well, if someone else says, I want you to do this, you're probably ready.
You're ready,
you wouldn't get the opportunity. So so I guess it's a bit of both. But you can learn a lot just by getting out of your comfort zone and doing things.
Perfect. Do it scared.
Absolutely.
Do it scared. Oh, dear. Look, TJ, thank you so much for your time. It's been so good to reconnect with you today and to hear more about who you are, what you do, and can people still get your book? Is it still available for sale?
Very much so. Absolutely. Yeah. Amazon. Many Worlds to Conquer. TJ Halbertsma. Perfect.
And the proceeds of books still go to JDRF as well?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah.
There you go. So there you go, people. I genuinely recommend and encourage you to get a copy of Many Worlds to Conquer. Apart from it being an absolutely cracking story, this is I just love the adventures that you've gone on, TJ, and you get to make a difference at the same time. So let's have no more needles in the world, well, for diabetics, type 1 diabetics anyway, and let's find a cure for that that insulin resistant, or that part of the body. You know what I'm saying? So
absolutely,
all is good. So you're a star. Thank you so much. Have a ball in Switzerland.
It was an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Deb, and let me know when you come to London.